stories about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ideanthro. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about something that you can really only learn by going out and observing a whole bunch of bioretention systems in the real world. And the reason we're talking about that, the reason we're talking about something you can only learn in the real world and that is super relevant in the real world of bioretention systems, is to celebrate the launch of our Bioretention in the Real World online training course. This is a course that it's been quite a while in the making, but the purpose of it here is to help you teach yourself, and teach yourself is an important part of this in the course, which I'm not actually going to go into right now, but teach yourself how to treat and how to understand bioretention systems as systems, because it is our belief that a really big reason we see so many bioretention systems failing to live up to their potential is that we collectively try and treat them as a whole bunch of individual components jammed together, rather than understanding them as a system and treating them as such. So we want this episode today to tie in with the course. Now, before we go any further, I also want to say, for my long-standing, dedicated Ideanthro viewers, I also have a little deal for you on the course today. For anyone who signs up to the course before the 31st of May 2019, so that is just over a week after we release this video. For anyone who signs up to the course before the 31st of May 2019, you can have 25% off if at checkout you enter the code BITRW25. That is BITRW25. Now, the spot to go to find out about the course and purchase it, you'll notice a trend here, is ideanthro.com/BITRW. BITRW, as you're picking up the trend here, is for bioretention in the real world. So go to the website, ideanthro.com/BITRW, and sign up there, and at checkout, enter BITRW25 to receive 25% off the price of the course if you do this before the 31st of May, which is a week away from when this video has been released. Okay, we got the salesmanship out of the way. Let's talk about plants that we have recently noticed doing well in bioretention systems. The reason we're able to have this conversation is, of course, because in our day-to-day work, we have recently been out inspecting a whole heap of water-sensitive urban design assets for a local government in southeast Queensland, and this included well over 200 bioretention systems. So we started to get a bit of a feel of what was going well and what wasn't by being out at systems in the real world. So I want to share a few observations with you. I have a few notes with me here, so let's do it. So first thing here is just some general observations about species that in these systems in southeast Queensland were seen to perform consistently well. And I'd like to say something here. Even if you don't live in southeast Queensland, and therefore the specific species that I mentioned might not be that relevant to you, a couple of general thoughts and general trends that pop up here, if you kind of dig into this, might be. So stay with me here. So species that have been consistently, or seem to be consistently doing well, were Lomandras, Longifolias, and Hystrix. That should not be a surprise to anyone. Imperatus cylindrica, various acacia species, and various Melaleuca species. There were also Casuarinas doing surprisingly well in certain circumstances, and typically that was circumstances where there were Casuarinas in the surrounding landscape and they'd been able to self-seed and come up on their own. So what we're really listing here is the first few options of things that we're just seeing consistently all the time doing really well, so kind of be your like good bets. And then we've got the Casuarinas and saying, look, where they seem to appear, they seem to do pretty well, but they're not as common as the others. So Lomandras, Longifolia, and Hystrix, Imperatus cylindrica, various acacia species, and now those are typically coming up from seed. They're self-seeding into the systems, natural recruitment. Melaleuca species, those are typically being planted, although occasionally you see a Melaleuca come up from seed. And then Casuarinas coming up from seed, where there are casuarinas in the surrounding landscape. So, yeah, some potential good things to follow on with there. Then what we've got here, and this is where a bit of compare and contrast is interesting. We've got a few species that are very regularly planted in bioretention systems, but we didn't see doing well particularly often. That should be a little bit of an alarm call. So things that we saw, things that we didn't see particularly regularly, except sometimes, we'll come to niches in a minute. Sometimes these plants did do well in good niches. Anyway, Carex suppressor. Carex is planted all the time in bioretention systems. It does really well in all the research about bioretention systems. We have to say that apart from in young systems that appear to be irrigated or systems that are overly wet because of some other fault, Carex suppressor does not seem to sustain itself in the long term. Our hypothesis here, if you look at where Carex suppressor grows in the real world, which is a little throwback to one of the very earliest Ideanthro episodes, if you look at where Carex suppressor grows in the real world, it likes to go right down on the edge of the water on creek banks. Not in the water, but it does like to have its stems clear, but then its roots going down into quite saturated soil. And that's not really a good description of bioretention systems in most instances. So we think it's a lack of water that's a problem for Carex suppressor. Phacinia nodosa is another one. You'll certainly see it do well some of the time, but considering just how widely planted it is, it's not surviving consistently. My hypothesis on this, because it is remarkably well adapted to sandy soils, and to sandy soils, my hypothesis here is that it's either suffering from drought stress, so not getting enough water, because typically where I've seen it grow in nature, it is kind of low lying. For example, it grows at Burley Heads on the Gold Coast, right down on the water's edge of the beach, not of a creek. Well, of the mouth of the creek at the beach. But the point is, it seems to like situations where there's plenty of water. It seems to be able to tolerate some salt, and it seems to be able to tolerate really sandy soils, but perhaps bioretention is a little too dry to it. And I've also previously been told that it doesn't like that much herbicide. So potentially it's getting sprayed out. The final one is Juncus. Typically it's Juncus usitatus that gets planted in bioretention systems. And again, this seems like it might be another drought stress situation, because where you have systems that are overly wet, it does seem to do okay. But in typical bioretention systems, given how widely it's planted, we just can't say that we were seeing a lot of it. So that's a little bit of a problem. Then what we have is plant species that do seem to do well in bioretention systems, but in niches. And particularly the niche that we just kept seeing all the time was wet patches. So some episodes back, we spoke about how we saw lots of bioretention systems developing little niches. So it'd be a little wet niche near the inlet. There might be a dry niche towards the outlet. There might be some more what you typically consider to be normal bioretention space in the center. And there were these little niches developing within systems. And in the wet niche, we saw some stuff that did seem to do consistently pretty well. And it's stuff that you wouldn't typically, for the most part, the first thing I mentioned is going to be an exception to this, but for the most part, it's things that you often wouldn't even see planted in bioretention. The exception is Carex suppressor. So Carex is planted lots, and where there was a wet niche in bioretention systems, either near the inlet or because the system was just consistently too wet, we would see Carex suppressor surviving and doing quite well, which builds into that theory that in standard bioretention practice, it's getting drought stressed. We also saw Leperonia doing quite well in those wet areas. We even saw some Chenoplectus pop up in them pretty consistently, and various Cyperus species doing well too. So the point here being, this comes back to this conversation about niches, where we can't just treat bioretention systems. This is like one of the macro lesson to take away here, because what we've seen is bioretention so often just gets planted with the same 3, 4, 5 species all the time. Carex, Juncus, Phacinia, some Lamandras, typically is what you're going to see get planted in bioretention. The problem here is that 3 of those we've said rarely survive in the long term unless potentially there's a niche. A couple of them do survive in the Lamandras, but don't typically survive in the long term unless there's a niche. But on the flip side, we're also saying it's really quite common for niches to develop, but then the things that get into those niches often weren't planted in the first place. So we've got this situation where it's saying, look, this cookie cutter approach of pick 3 or 4 species and stick them everywhere, in the long term just doesn't make sense for bioretention systems. And so that's a macro lesson to take away. The one other thing that we want to share here is, if you look at the guidelines about bioretention systems, if you look, for example, at healthy waterways, healthy land and water by design, construction establishment guidelines, the metric for success is like greater than 90% plant cover. Success for the plant cover, like greater than 90% plant cover. I'd say one thing really, really clearly here. Of the 200 systems that we observed, the only systems that weren't young and being irrigated and really, really high profile looked after. So actually there are some great systems in Southport Broadwater Parklands, and there are some young systems that are clearly receiving a high level of maintenance, as are the ones in Southport Broadwater Parklands, because it's a high profile park. Excluding those high maintenance cases, in any typical bioretention system receiving a reasonable but not excessive amount of maintenance, the only ones of those that showed greater than 90% plant cover, so therefore successful plant cover, were those systems that either had Imperator cylindrica running around in it or trees. Let's just dwell on that for a second. If you want, based on these 200 sites, it would suggest that if you want to get 90% or greater plant cover, which is the desirable outcome, the only way that in these systems that's being achieved without an excessively high level of maintenance is with either Imperator cylindrica or tree cover in the system. The Imperator, because it has this running nature to spread around things, and the tree cover, because obviously the tree will come up from one spot and spread horizontally, and it'll spread its roots horizontally through the system. So this should be suggesting to us that what the common trend here is that in both those instances, it's a spreading. The Imperator spreads at ground level, and the trees spread at canopy level or root level throughout the system. Well, both canopy level and root level. And so the takeaway here isn't necessarily that you should be using Imperator. This is another macro takeaway. Isn't that you should be using Imperator or a specific tree species, but it's that you need a plant in your bioretention system that has this ability to spread in amongst the typical clumping species. Because the big problem here with so many bioretention plants, Lamandras, Carex, Phacenia, is that they clump. So they will spread, but only to a certain degree when the plant gets to maturity. But things like Imperator run all in amongst everything and fill it up. The takeaway here is you need something that in some way, whether it's at ground level running, whether it's a ground cover itself, whether it's a prostrate shrub, whether it's trees, you need something that has a truly spreading and running habit to fill in all the gaps. And those are our observations from some 200 plus bioretention systems in the real world. So before we go, a quick reminder, the course is out there. I am super proud of it. I think it's awesome, but I made it. So, take that with a grain of salt. But if you are interested, you can go to ideanthro.com/BITRW. You can see a couple of examples of the videos that you'll find in the course. You'll see an example page from the written guide that comes with the course. And if you sign up before the 31st of May 2019 and use the code BITRW25 at checkout, you'll get 25% off. And that's a thank you to everyone who is a dedicated and regular viewer of Ideanthro. I am not going to be sharing that promo code anywhere else at all, just this video. Okay, sweet. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you have questions, comments, want to get in touch, hit us up in all the usual ways. You can find us on ideanthro.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and occasionally on Instagram, and of course on YouTube, because that's where we post all the videos. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the course, and we will see you next time.
Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro, improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.